If you're new to human design, you might be wondering, what's the deal with all these white open shapes that show up in my design? What do they mean? What's going on with these open centers? In this video, we're going to talk about it. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. One of my favorite tools to do that is human design. Today we're going to be talking about the centers, and in particular our open centers, which is one of my favorite parts of human design. I think it's an area that really offers us a lot of space for growth, as well as a lot of space for adaptability and change, flexibility, fluidity, and things that I think personally our culture could use a little bit more of. When you open up your human design chart, which you can get at any website you like, any version, it might look a little bit different from mine that I'm showing here, but whatever you're pulling up, you're going to see that some of the shapes or centers that you see on this chart are not colored in. Those are called open. So we have the colored in ones, and then we have these open ones. So these open centers are going to show up for most people. Not everyone. It is possible to have all of them colored in, but most of us will have some, and some of us will actually have all. A small number of us may have all of these open. What our open centers are showing us is they're an area of our design where energy can flow through from other people, from our environment, from the cosmos, as we go through planetary transits. These are the areas of our design where we don't necessarily have a consistent and reliable way of working with that center. And so we are influenced, we're exposed to other ways of people who are coming from a defined center place, from one of these colored in centers. Their energy is going to pass through us because we're open. So it's kind of like a sampler platter. It's an area of our chart that allows us to taste and experience different ways of being in the theme of that center, which is pretty cool. It's pretty important and neat that when you have an open center, you have this openness, this ability to try on, experiment, experience different things that you're not going to have so much of in the areas where you are defined, because you're always accessing that theme in a more reliable, consistent way. Now, the other thing about open centers, though, and what a lot of us experience them as and tend to experience, particularly when we're younger, maybe if we haven't worked with human design before, if we haven't worked with, other kind of aligned or harmonious self-development tools, then we might experience the open centers more in the sense of pressure, more in the sense of challenging things like stress and anxiety, anger, other emotional things that pass through us. So the pressure comes through these open centers because we don't have our filled in sort of reliable way of working with them. When others' energy does come through them, and we're not accustomed with how to work with that, we can experience it as pressure. It can feel like we need to do something in that area. We can actually experience other people's stuff as our own through these centers. And so what often happens in your open centers is that you're actually amplifying other people's stuff. A really good example of this is the solar plexus, which is down here at the bottom right. This is our emotional center. Folks who have defined emotional center, solar plexus, are going to have a particular way that emotional energy moves through them. And so those folks, part of their task and their work here in figuring out their own design is that they're learning to move with that wave. They're getting, they're kind of educating themselves about their own wave and how their emotional wave works, and they're learning how to wait through that wave when they make decisions. But if we have it open, it's about half of the population has it open, then we're going to tend to experience other people's emotional wave as it passes through us. And that might be a kind of disruptive experience that is actually amplifying the energy. And so we may seem like the more emotional person in the room, even though it's not our emotions necessarily. We have all this openness to take it in and to work with it and to amplify it, and to reflect it back at the person that it came from. But that person is not necessarily going to view our perhaps an emotional outburst as related to their sort of energetic wave. They're going to see it as, wow, you're really emotional. So sometimes when you have an open center, you can seem really heightened in that area. You can experience a lot of pressure in that area, and it can be something that you're really trying to dispense. You're really trying to like get past, get it out, deal with it in some way. And so this is an area where your sort of logical brain, your conscious mind will often speak in the voice of the open center, where you're experiencing all this pressure and say, you need to do something. It might avoid certain situations. It might over focus on a particular area where you're open, because it's feeling that pressure. So, in the example of the emotional solar plexus, a lot of folks who have this open, we might tend to actually avoid confrontation. We might tend to avoid situations that we think are going to be really emotionally activating or uncomfortable. We might tend to say, people please or try to appease people because we're afraid that if we speak our truth, if we act in the way we really want to, then we might set somebody else off, and that's going to be really uncomfortable for us to have that energy moving through our open center and amplified and reflecting back at them. And so we try to avoid the situation. So that's just one example of how this energy moves. And we're going to talk through the different open centers here in a second so that you can kind of identify the ones that are in your chart. But talking about it generally, the one other thing I want to say is, so we have this pressure, we have this tendency to amplify, to reflect back, to often not really know what to do with the experience of everyone else's energy moving through us. But then, we have often our logical brain is going to engage with that energy and try to convince us to act in ways that maybe aren't consistent with our strategy and authority, which incorporates our whole design, and instead to really like focus on that pressure and act from that pressure, which usually isn't good for us. But then what can happen with an open center that I really think is cool and that is worth, being aware of, the gift, the possibility, the intelligence of these open centers, is that once you learn to work with them, and specifically once you learn to cultivate the gift of discernment in these centers, which is discerning what's yours and what's not. So, for example, in this center, which emotions are yours and which emotions you're feeling from other people. Once you know that and can hone in on that and can identify that, well, now you have this unique intelligence because you're able to identify what's going on with others, and you're actually able to take full advantage of that sampling, kind of tasting frequency that I mentioned earlier, where you can experience different ways of being. And once you know that they're not yours, and you're not stressed out and feeling pressure from them, but you can just say, oh, that's so interesting, I'm feeling this way. It isn't mine, but it's a really like interesting way to realize that somebody in this room is feeling this way. And that can be a way of being able to work with and interact with people who have such a wide range of experiences, and really like in whatever you're doing, to be able to consider all the different viewpoints and angles in that center that people might approach things with. And then more specifically, when you're with someone one-on-one, you might be able to kind of key into their experience in a way that they can't, that they maybe can't feel it or aren't as aware of it because it's just sort of normal to them. You may be able to identify that and help work with it. So I'll actually give an example of that next, but since we've been talking about the emotional solar plexus, and I've sort of started to talk a little bit about how that operates, I'll say that the gift of this one is that often once you learn to work with it, so with the emotional solar plexus, if you have this open, rather than always avoiding confrontation or being afraid of other people's emotions or what might come up in the room, learning that sometimes your emotional response is actually coming from someone else. Also understanding that they're not necessarily going to know that, and so reacting in that way and saying, hey, this is your emotion, usually doesn't work so great. But one thing you can do, and with a lot of the centers, a useful thing to do when you notice that you're acting from that center. So with the solar plexus, when you notice you're kind of avoiding, when you notice that you're maybe people pleasing, you're trying to appease people, you're managing emotions of others, something that you can do with most of these centers is you can just exit the room. So try to get some physical distance, which in human design is kind of energetic distance. You're stepping away from that person's aura. You're stepping away from their energetic influence. If you step outside the room, you can then kind of notice what happens with my emotions. So with the solar plexus, one way to discern and learn to work with what's mine and what's not mine. If you're feeling emotionally heightened and then you step away, what emotions stay with you for over time, and what emotions sort of start to fade? So if you're continuing to feel emotionally activated, that might be a sign that it actually is your emotion that you're feeling. But if it's going to fade away pretty quickly, then that's an indication that you're feeling something that's in the room. And so if you're returning to that room, you might be able to do so with that kind of like observational sense of notice when that emotion is coming back up again, notice where it might be coming from and what might be in the room that we need to work with. And so a person with an open solar plexus can do really well in a group environment, for example, like in a meeting or an event of some kind where there are emotions that are in the room that maybe everyone isn't acknowledging, can be really good at saying, like, here's the part of the agenda where we need to slow down, or maybe some things are coming up and maybe we need to dig in a little bit more. Or maybe digging into emotions isn't always the right move. Maybe sometimes it's like, hey, I think we all need a breather. We all need to step apart. Being able to tell that there's an emotionally heightened resonance in the room, and whether that's something to work with or maybe something to allow to dissipate a little, can be super helpful. And that's something that you can contribute if you have an open solar plexus. So moving over to the left side over here to the spleen. So this is one that I think is really cool in terms of the possibilities of it. So the spleen is an area that deals with a few different things, but it's our oldest sort of instinctive center. It has to do with fear. It has to do with survival. So the spleen is really focused on your health, on what will help you to survive. It's very quick, it's very instinctive. And what will happen if you have, like I do, an open spleen is that you are, sometimes you're experiencing a lot of fear about survival can definitely come up. A sense of, sometimes what happens with people with open spleens is that we can kind of cling to someone who has a defined spleen, even if they're not very healthy for us. Even in extreme examples, can stay in like an abusive situation because we don't have this inherent reliable sense of how to find our own safety and our own health and our own survival in a reliable, consistent way. And so we can kind of attach to those who do and tend to kind of stick around because it feels like that person is really necessary for our survival. So we can have a lot of fear. If we have, let's say we're cohabiting with someone and our relationship isn't going well, we can ask all these questions like, oh shit, if I end things, what does that mean for me? Am I going to survive? Am I going to be okay? And that's one way that pressure can come up in this center. We can experience open and defined spleens both can have like certain issues or things around the immune system and around health, but we can have various issues with our health through this center. What we have a gift with, though, and what can be really helpful, and with the spleen, it's sort of like working around cultivating that ability to cue into our own body, our own like body signals, being able to sometimes step away from someone with a defined spleen and like really access like what is it about our own health. When we get to the point where we can tell what's my body signal versus like what is the fear signal maybe that's coming from someone else, then we can be really effective often as healers. So people who do healing work, especially like energetic or body-based healing work, like maybe a massage therapist, maybe somebody who does some modality of energy work, they might, if they have an open spleen, be really gifted at being able to kind of discern once they've worked with it and learned this. Oh wow, I'm feeling it. And some people do like feel it physically. If they're working with somebody, they can actually kind of feel that person's pain and identify it and say, I know this isn't mine because I work with my own body. And somebody who does this has to have a really good sense, right, of their own body and where they are. It's helpful to kind of check in with yourself before doing work with others to know your present state. To be able to say, like, is this mine or is this yours? But once you know that, you can actually be really effective in saying, I think like I'm feeling this pain. Something's coming up that I think is actually coming from you. And they can be really intuitive in working with the body and working with health and working with wellness and even working, as something like a counselor, like with other people's fears and survival fears. So that is the open spleen. Since we're down here at the bottom, let's go to the open root. So the root is one of the pressure centers in the body. We've got the root and then we've got the head up at the top. When you have an open root, this is, the pressure centers are where things come in from below or from above. And with the root, we're talking about physical adrenal stress. We're talking about sort of the material side of things. And the pressure to get things done, to get things moving. Energy moves up from the bottom here and up into the rest of the body, and eventually, might get to the throat where we manifest. But it's got a lot to go through before it gets there. When it comes in at the root, if you're open, this is one that I find is often with clients pretty easy to identify and relate to. If you have an open root, you tend to have stress, of course, like everybody can have stress, but you don't have a consistent, reliable way of dispensing with that stress, and you're feeling stress from others. And so that stress is not necessarily your own. It's constant, it's always there. It's this pressure to do things, to get things done, to often it's to hurry. The open root center can really want to hurry to dispense of that energy. It doesn't feel good. We want to get it out of our bodies. We want to not be stressed. And so we're like, I'll just take that on. I'll just hurry up and do it. Often we'll with the open root, we'll like grab things that aren't really ours. We'll grab a task. We'll grab we'll notice like, oh, it's not clean in here. And instead of asking like, who in my family made the mess or who should maybe like be cleaning up, we'll just do it. We just want to get it done. We can get it out of the way. I sometimes joke with clients who have an open root, how do you feel about like tabs open on your browser? I feel like I'm always trying to like dispense of things that are just sort of there, like an open tab, even if it's not the most important thing, because I just want to get it done. I want to get it out of the way. I don't want to think about it. I want to keep moving. The problem with this is that you're taking on things that aren't yours. They're flowing into the rest of our design, and they're clogging things up. They're gonna move into our centers and, our limited energy that we have, and we might find ourselves kind of spinning our wheels. We might find ourselves stuck with something that isn't ours. We might find ourselves resentful and regretting that we took something on, or we might feel like we never have time for the things that really are for us. So if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling like, gosh, I always get things done, I don't know why everybody else isn't doing that, instead of pushing harder, working harder, hurrying faster, the key with the open root is to realize and learn that that pressure, that stress is not going to go away. You're always going to have it. And that may seem kind of fatalistic and like, oh God, but the wisdom of it, the nice thing about knowing that it's always there, is knowing that it's not a cue to do something. It's not actually pressure that you need to take on in the form of action every time. Knowing that hurrying up and getting things done is not going to relieve the pressure can actually kind of paradoxically take some of the pressure off, in the sense that you're not going to respond to it. You're not going to do everything. You're going to check in with your strategy and authority and only do certain things. And again, if you're feeling the root pressure, getting away from people with the root, going outside can be really helpful. Grounding in nature, put your back on a tree, put your butt on the ground, whatever is physically accessible to you. Co-regulating with nature can be really good for an open root, because it just grounds us and it kind of reminds us that like we don't have to be doing everything. Helps us dig into what's important, helps us feel that support of the earth, feel supported, which is something that we might not feel a lot when we're feeling all this physical adrenal stress, and it helps our body to regulate, because we do suffer from often some of the complications of physical stress with this open root, so we want to be really mindful of that. What's helpful again is that I sort of hinted at it, that once we know that it's not all ours, and we can discern that what's going through, we can identify like, oh, I'm feeling pressure. Here's the thing. I wonder if this is somebody's, right? I wonder if I should delegate this or mention this to somebody, or maybe there's something, and I always like jokingly say this with my sort of like anti-capitalist view, is that often I think we take things on that nobody needs to be doing, that didn't belong to anyone, that no one's strategy and authority would have directed them towards. And so the wisdom of this center can actually be, maybe helping others to see that like the stress that they're feeling or the things that they think should be done, maybe they shouldn't, maybe they don't need to be, maybe nobody needs to do them. So the sacral center, now this one is particularly notable in that you only have it defined if you're a generator type. Generator, manifesting generator, one of those two. And so I'll probably talk about this more in other videos, talking about types of what it means to have an open sacral center. But generally speaking, if you have an open sacral center, this is the generative creative force. And it's a place where people who have a defined one, like I do, who are a generator type, we have sort of consistent, reliable access to that kind of energy, and it's a little bit like an ongoing motor. Now, I could go on a lot about generators and why you might not feel that way necessarily, but since we're talking about open centers, let's talk about an open sacral. So you have an open sacral center. What's important to know is that 70% of people have it defined, and so you're going to experience a lot of people in your environment with this defined center, and you're going to experience this stress and this pressure. And I think it's exacerbated and amplified by our current culture, dominant sort of culture, at least in the US where I live, in Europe, in a lot of places, and unfortunately kind of infecting the world. It's this pressure to work. It's this pressure to be consistently, constantly on. It's the 9-to-5 job. It's the idea that your energy should be relatively consistent from day to day. And if you have an open sacral, it's not. It's definitely not. And so with with this one, you might often feel the pressure of comparing yourself to all these generators in your world, and to thinking, well, he got this much done, why can't I? They got this much done, why can't I? She got this much done, why can't I? You might evaluate, what you think a fair work day is. I should be able to work at least 8 hours. I should be able to do what other people can. And what's sometimes really hard for this open center is to acknowledge that you actually can't, and that you will burn yourself out. You will tax out your health. You will not be doing well. You've probably know this. You've probably experienced this in your life already. You just don't have this kind of energy, and that's not something to feel guilty or ashamed of. It's not something to let your kind of conscious mind tell you you need to just like push through. It's actually something to let go of. It's something to, when you work with this open center, it's important to acknowledge the need for rest, the need for rest, especially away from generator types. And if you don't know, just step away from anybody like any of these. So having a space where you can rest, where you can find your own pace, can be really helpful. If you're not a sacral type, it's really good. The sleep advice varies by specific type, but it's really good if you can to get at least a night a week or so, more if possible, where you're not in a bed sleeping with a generator type, because our sort of constantly on energy can actually make it hard to sleep. You want to, and if that's totally inaccessible to you, if there's no way to negotiate for a night a week away from your lovely generator type, at least getting an hour before bed, at least having some time during the day to rest, maybe even take a nap on your own, space where you're not having this energy in your kind of auric presence. These types tend to need to kind of lie down and go to bed before it's time to sleep, to be able to discharge that sacral energy at the end of the day. And just giving yourself a lot of permission and a lot of like understanding that you're not meant to be a sacral type can be really helpful. The wisdom, of course, is for all of us that we're working too hard. You have the wisdom to be able to say, like, y'all are working too hard, but also you have the ability, as sacral energy flows through you from others, to kind of get to taste and experience a lot of different ways of creativity, of generating of energy, and to get really wise about energy and about energy levels. And an open sacral type might be really good at doing rest advocacy, at doing labor advocacy, advocating for people to have breaks from their labor and have paid leave and things like that. Can really understand the importance of those things. Moving into the ego or will center, the little one here, the heart center. It has a lot of names. So this little guy, more common to be open in this one. So a lot of us have it. If you have this center open, this is a center that deals with, it's the heart, so it deals with self-confidence and self-worth. It also tends to bring up a lot of stuff around money, related to self-worth, right? Value, the idea of value is in here. Being able to provide is part of this. Our confidence, our sense of our power comes up in this center. So if you have it open, also commitment, by the way, comes into this a lot. If you have it open, what's happening is that other people's will energy coming through you, you might tend to, it's very common with open will center, to make commitments you can't keep. So especially if you're with somebody with a defined will, or maybe there's a transit happening that's kind of activating your defining your will center temporarily, you might commit to something, and then when that planet leaves or that person's not in the room, you really have trouble following through on the commitment. It's actually really helpful. It's really hard, really scary, but for someone with this center open, is to ask yourself, can you avoid commitments? And I know that sounds shitty. It doesn't mean avoid doing things for people. It doesn't mean avoid coming through, but it means avoiding promises, avoiding committing to things whenever you can, advance commitments, especially, instead of saying, I'll definitely do that in 6 months, or I'll definitely commit to doing this over the next few weeks. Is it possible to say something like, if it's something with a date, maybe it's that feels good to me right now. I think I'd like to do that. Let's keep checking in on it. Let's pencil it on the calendar. Let's put a tentative date on the calendar. I think it's really interesting that most of us have this open, and so shifting this expectation can actually be really helpful. Like, it can really empower others in your environment. Sometimes if you say, let's check in on this, it might be that another person is the one who needs to make a change, who needs to cancel or reschedule. Having more openness around, yeah, let's hang out this weekend, but let's check in with each other that morning, see how we're feeling. As somebody from disability justice communities, I think this is fantastic practice in general. It doesn't mean you're flaky. It doesn't mean you can't make commitments. It's just acknowledging that we all are in a different place in the present moment. We might find that in the future we feel differently, and that's okay. And we should sort of acknowledge that and allow for that. Another sense of like not making commitments is surprise people, right? Instead of saying, yes, I'll definitely do it, is it possible that you check in with your strategy and authority, you do what your strategy and authority is naturally guiding you towards, and then maybe it's like, surprise, I did this thing for you. That can help avoid the problem you often have with an open will, where it's kind of a vicious cycle where you make a promise, you don't fill it, and then it affects your self-worth. You feel like a shitty friend. You feel like in order to because the commitment thing, it kind of comes from that sense of self-worth. You feel like in order to be a good friend, be a good partner, a good parent, that you need to come through, that you need to commit, that you need to make promises. And so you can actually overpromise. This is the amplification of that pressure. You can feel pressure to commit to a bunch of things, to say, yes, I'll do it. And then you're like, oh shit, I really can't do it. Or you'll keep trying, but it'll just be like a slog, and it'll be late, and everybody's kind of stressed. And then you will be guilty, and you'll blame yourself, and you'll feel shame and all those emotions around your self-worth. And so that's a real self-perpetuating cycle that can come up with this open will center, especially if you have, like I do, an open root and an open will. You've got the stress coming in here, the hurry up and do it. So you grab on and you commit, and that's a real recipe for disaster that I've had to learn to work with. So challenging yourself not to make commitments, to avoid commitments whenever possible, to avoid immediate commitments whenever possible, to allow yourself time to check with your strategy and authority at least before making commitments, but if possible, not even making a firm commitment, but just, allowing things to flow and see how they go, can be really useful for the center. This center can also have challenges, like I said, with money and valuing yourself. So often, it's really like challenging for this center if you're doing like a salary negotiation. You often say yes to the first offer. It's really hard to, like, I hate bargaining. I really don't feel comfortable negotiating and bargaining, but I've had to teach myself to do that. If you're in business, you might struggle with pricing your services too low, and you may need support from somebody. Often, even though being around somebody with a defined center can amplify things, I do find that the advice from people with a defined will center can be really useful. Asking, like, hey, do you think my price is right here? Do you think the salary they're offering me is good? Because your defined will center friends will be like, hell no, here's what you're worth, and do not compromise. So they can really like help advocate for you sometimes in that, and help you to see where you're accepting something that you maybe shouldn't be or should be reconsidering. Once you become intelligent and wise to this center, I think I kind of hinted at it, but you can really, the gift is that you can really help people to see, the value of going with the flow, the value of not always scheduling and committing to everything in advance. You can also become really wise to like value and worth. And once you you realize that the pressure doesn't mean that you don't have worth. You can you can see, you can get a sense too of like the egos in the room, and when people are trying to unduly influence each other and are, going on power trips, like you can actually become really wise to that through this center. Okay, we're going to go to the G, or the identity center. So this one, right here in the middle, it has to do with your identity. There's an interesting relationship between the G center and location. It's kind of weird, but or it can seem kind of weird without the full context of the theory. But basically, yeah, it's location. So if you have an open G, it's identity. It's also like a path or purpose. So the path thing kind of helps you to see the location bit. You can feel like, where am I going? What's next? What's my path? This open center, might really struggle with questions of identity. Who am I? And feel like you really have to label yourself. You might be really uncomfortable if you're going through an identity transition, trying to figure out, am I neurodivergent? Am I queer? Things like that. You might tend to kind of jump on labels, or feel like you need one and feel like there's something wrong with you because you can't label yourself. Your identity may have shifted a lot through your life, and that might feel like, oh my god, I need to just, like, all these people who know who they are, why don't I know who I am? You might have a shifting sense of path or purpose going through different careers, and you might feel like, why don't I just have a consistent path? But the wisdom of this center is kind of wandering. It is, it's letting your path be revealed to you. It's letting your identity be revealed to you and be fluid and flexible sometimes. People who have this open center often have things introduced to them by other people. So they get initiated into their path or purpose or into an identity. They can't grab for it if they're like, I need a purpose. It's whatever they pick is probably not right. If you're like, I just need to pick something, I need to do it. It's better to let people around you know, like, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to figure out what's next for me. And people will naturally tend to suggest things to you. Location matters because if you have the center open, you're really sensitive to location. So if you're in the wrong location, you get the same proposal and it will feel wrong. If you get in the right location, it will feel right. So it's good to, like, just an intuitive sense of like what locations feel really good to you, what places, what spaces feel good, and kind of have that list. These are places where opportunities showed up for me. Oh, that's really interesting. I remember that when, somebody told me about a job opening, I wasn't really thinking about where I was, but maybe I'll go back to that place. Returning to those places can be really helpful. If a place feels just wrong to you, trust that. That might not be a good place to receive opportunities. And just, being open to suggestions, to opportunities, to things that come up from others that might help you to figure out where you're going. Letting others know when you're on that search can be helpful. And understanding that sometimes the pressure, you might feel that pressure is like, oh, so-and-so is going into medical school. Should I go into medical school? And identifying that, oh, no, maybe that identity pressure is their identity going through me. And so letting yourself tune into strategy and authority to say, is it mine? Is it not mine? But you can sample and taste, and the wisdom is that you do get to wander, but you also get to experience and try on different identities, to be with people who have different identities and to kind of feel into that a little bit. To feel into different purposes and paths, and to, maybe help people ultimately define theirs. So that's kind of cool. When we move into the throat, if you have an open throat center, this one's interesting. This is it reminds me of the solar plexus in the amplification sense. So, the solar plexus people, when it's open, might seem like the emotional ones. The people with the open throat are often the ones who are blurting out a lot and might be really chatty, and might be really talkative. And that's because you don't have a reliable, consistent way of communicating. And when people are around you with a defined throat, you will feel the pressure to talk. You'll feel the pressure to express yourself, and you'll feel the pressure, not just expression, but also manifestation in the center. So you might feel the pressure
to create something, to make it real, to manifest something. If people are around you, in a group meeting, for example, you might be somebody who doesn't really want to be talking a lot, or just doesn't want to be talking in a particular meeting, but feels like you have to. You can feel like this sense of rising pressure, like I need to say something, I need to blurt something out. I haven't spoken. People are noticing I haven't spoken. I need to prove myself. If I don't talk, people aren't going to take me seriously. And that is pressure. Like that is your brain saying, "Oh my God, I need to do it." When you wait, it's really interesting. When you wait for a more authentic need to communicate, when you wait to express yourself, sometimes people might ask you your opinion. So you might be, if you're a projector, for example, invited to give an opinion. There might be, as a generator, something to respond to that ends up being expression. And so tuning into that strategy and authority instead, and remembering that you're not required to speak, you're not required to always express yourself. It's okay to let those different ways of expression around you move through you, to listen, to observe, to feel into how others are expressing themselves. You can have a real sense with this one of ways of communicating, so you can actually really pick up on the differences, the nuances of communication, the nonverbal and verbal ways we communicate, and writing and other kinds of communication. You can have a gift with language because you have a real sense of how to shift your communication style to meet a particular audience. Often these folks are really good at adapting the way they communicate, depending on the context, and so can be really gifted at communication because of this. Can express themselves in really creative and unique ways because they're able to move in and out rather than having one particular communication style or expression style. They have a lot more experimentation there. They can pick up on someone else's preferred communication style and match to that. And so that can be really helpful, and they can help us identify when folks with a defined throat like me, when we are not getting through, right, because of our expression. So that can be really good. Now the ajna, or the mind center, this is part of our thinking brain, and this is a place where we really process information, move it down into the rest of the design. If you have this one open, I jokingly will say, oh yeah, I'm closed-minded because I have a defined ajna, but it is kind of like open-minded. It's you don't have a particular defined, consistent way of processing information, and so you can be open to different ways of doing it. It might feel like there's a lot of pressure to figure out what's the theory, what's the framework, how are we doing this, how am I processing information, how should I be thinking, what's the perspective I should be taking, so what's the mind, right, where should my mind be. It might feel like I need to develop an opinion on this really quickly. I need to have a model or a way of working with this information, when it's not really time for that yet. You might be influenced by other people's defined ways of doing things, so that when you're in a space with somebody, you might get pressured into a way of thinking that isn't really right for you, or doesn't really make sense to you, doesn't really work for you. So it can be helpful to be aware of that, so that you can take space and you can maybe sometimes work on your own, do the mental processing on your own, where you're less influenced by that. You have more flexibility when you're not being pressured by others. You have a lot of flexibility with your mind, different ways of thinking, so you can be really innovative and creative in ways of approaching a problem, ways of theorizing something. You might come up with novel frameworks and novel ways, or synthesize different ones, because you can tune into different ways of thinking. So the gift here, is seeing all the ways we process information, seeing different people's mental needs, different people's cognitive needs. Neurodivergence, great example of this, right? If you work with neurodivergent people, we're all neurodiverse. is being able to see that like we don't all think in the same way. We don't all learn in the same way. A teacher who has this might be really great at, once they understand it, at being able to guide students through different ways of thinking about things, helping them see when they're kind of rigid and stuck in one way of thinking, or maybe political work, like being able to tell like, hey, we're stuck in this one ideology, what are the other ways of looking at this? And then finally, you have the open head center, the crown. So this is the other pressure center, it's the mental pressure center. And so you can feel a lot of mental pressure here. You can feel a lot of anxiety. You can feel with this one, it has a lot to do with like ideas and inspiration. So if everything is flowing in here and it's open, you don't have a defined sort of way of knowing what is yours to be inspired by. You might find, I know that I have this problem where I can be really overwhelmed by things like reading blogs, or I often have like the world's longest recommended book list because I'm like, what? I don't know what to be inspired by, right? Everything is inspiring. I find every question interesting. Questions tend to flow through here, and then they get processed and maybe they turn into an opinion or a statement or framework here. But up here in the head, they're really like, they're the open questions. And so you can find that every open question feels like it's for you. You have the pressure of the questions that are for others to answer, but like every question that someone's wrestling with, like you want to solve the problem. You want to, I find this is a problem solving thing where it's like, I want to fix everything. I want to help everyone. I want to answer every question. It can be hard to leave questions open. The thing that we need to do here that can be really challenging for us is to let questions go, allow questions to be, um, respect sort of the beauty of the open question, or all the things in the universe that will go unanswered, tuning into our strategy and authority to figure out like, what is the question that I'm meant to answer? What are the mental things? What are the ideas that I'm meant to work with? Versus all the ideas that are going to filter through your brain. So many ideas with this open sensor. I'm totally guilty. I have a Notion database with thousands of content ideas that I need to remind myself, like, check strategy and authority before you write that down, because it might not be for you. You might actually have ideas that filter through you that are for other people, that you're not meant to do anything with. That they'll energetically, you just have to kind of trust, they'll reach the right person at the right time. Maybe somebody will ask me for an idea and I'll be like, hey, what about this? You could work with this, but not everything is for you. And so with this open center, sometimes it's useful to limit your media diet, limit your kind of consumption. If you're feeling kind of like too much is coming in, allow yourself to sit down with a particular question or idea, and not actually be exposed to a lot more incoming, so that you can kind of be with that thing. Maybe not like signing up for a million classes or forums or public debate, like things where a lot of new stuff's going to come through, can be useful, or just that can help you to kind of discern what's yours and what isn't. What are the ideas and the questions that keep coming up even when you're alone, even when you're not like exposed? And that's something that I like to do, is just like allow, the ideas are fine, the ideas can happen, but sometimes I don't write them down, and then I notice that the ones that were really for me keep coming even when I don't write them down. So that can be a useful practice. It's hard, like I have ADHD, it can be hard if you're kind of afraid of forgetting, but trusting that they'll come back, that the inspiration will keep coming to you if it's for you. And then the wisdom is being able to see like all the different questions that there are out there, all the inspiration that is out there, and how inspiration works, how different people sees inspiration and work with ideas is the gift of that center. So that's an overview of all of the open centers. If you have questions about open centers in general or a specific one in your chart, please feel free to leave a comment below, or if there's any human design content you're looking for. I do offer human design work. I'm actually in the process right now, August 23, of revising my offerings. So if you're seeing this right now, I would love for you to click on the work with me link below, and I have a free explore session. It's half an hour, so we can chat about human design and your interests and see if I might be able to help you out, see if we're a good fit, and I'm happy to tell you about what I'm developing right now and get you in a little bit early on that, get you in a little bit of a discount. And if you're seeing this later, you may already see on the Work With Me page some human design offerings as well, but that link will be below. I also would encourage you to sign up for my newsletter, and I talk about all sorts of topics, including human design, including astrology and tarot, and different ways, different systems for viewing the world. If you're nerdy about that kind of thing, that is the best place to find out when new human design and other offerings are coming, to know when I've posted a video on the channel, as well as blog posts. I have some written content on human design as well. So I hope to see you around the channel, and thanks for tuning in.